Good morning. I'm Brendan Reimer with the Canadian Community Economic Development Network. Again, for those who weren't here, it's a national network formed about 10 years ago of organizations and individuals who are working to reduce poverty in their communities, to work at community renewal, and a lot of different efforts that are involved with the social economy and community economic development. How are we involved in supporting research and policy? Those would be some of the fundamental pieces or reasons why the network was created 10 years ago, to do the kinds of things that individual organizations on their own often have a hard time doing. It would have been one of the reasons why, and I was mentioning this yesterday, one of the early efforts of CCEDNet would have been to work with the federal government to develop the social economy research initiative and to be a strong voice for it to be a QR model. The methodology that you were talking about before, it isn't necessarily a natural one to shirk. It's not a natural one to government-funded research projects. Just like I talked about yesterday, the co-construction with government, it took some learning to understand what a partnership model meant. But I think that's a role that CCEDNet's played over the years in working with government and working with SSHRC, is to bring that lens and to be insistent that it will demonstrate better outcomes and better results. And I wanted to say on methodology, it's been interesting, in addition to the methodology about the engagement process and participatory research, where it seems like, and from my own experience in the node in the prairies, where research has led to things, is when it has come out of a question from the community to begin with, and then there's been that kind of a process, and there's been the capacity to move with it afterwards. And you can't always tell that piece ahead of time, but when there's been both that burning question ahead of time, or a burning need ahead of time, and then that process, and then there's a group ready to run with it, that's where we've seen the greatest change, the greatest impact, and the greatest action. So CCEDNet's been involved with research over the years on a number of different topics. There was a 3-year project on the links between community economic development and social inclusion that included theoretical pieces, a whole range of case studies, surveys of about 60 organizations in Canada, asking how they facilitated social inclusion. And social inclusion being a broad concept, right? Economic, functional, and cultural, and all these kinds of things. We've done research on the idea of place-based poverty reduction, and especially different ways of measuring that. We've done research on new Canadians and looking at community economic development and social enterprise models as a good tool for settlement and for creating opportunities for new Canadians. We've also done other pieces of research on local food economies and local food systems, on the role of housing in community renewal. Sometimes we partner with others to do these pieces, and sometimes we'll do the work ourselves. So there's quite a bit of this on our website, which you can all visit. But I think one of the strong pieces that's going to go forward as well is not just our role across the country in advocating for this kind of research, but also the connections. And Rochelle was talking about the social economy research partnerships, which CCEDNet acts as a co-lead together with the University of Victoria. But I think one of the pieces, and this is where Rochelle's job is really fun, is I think that one of the great outcomes of this research project over the last number of years, aside from all the work that's happened in different pockets and different communities, discovered different ideas, and that'll have an impact in that work. But one of the interesting results of this whole project has been the number of people that have become engaged in this work. I don't know how many times, and I've had the privilege of being at different forums like this across the country, and there are reams of academics who said, I haven't been involved with this cohort across the country before, but my work fits. I think Dave was talking about that yesterday. I see the fit. And it's brought in a whole range of people. It's brought in a whole range of students to this work who now see a connection across the country with many other organizations and many other people who are working at this stuff together, who are dealing with the same issues in communities, looking for the same kinds of solutions. So I think the relationships that have evolved out of this, and I don't want to use the word sector because it's more like a community of people that's grown. I think is going to be a legacy of this project that's going to be very significant. And hopefully, CCEDNet can play some role, and hopefully there's other ways too, to continue those relationships going forward. But there's also a ton of information that isn't getting around to everybody. That's where you come up with a fancy title like knowledge mobilization. But again, I think that's going to be a role that our network will play in the coming years. I get phone calls and emails weekly, people saying, I'm looking at this kind of initiative, I'm looking at this issue. We're trying to figure out how to do this. Who else has done this in Canada? Through the research partnerships, through people like Rochelle, through our work over the years, we become an information broker for people who are looking for connections to partners to do research on, to existing research, and much more. So that we become kind of a web of relationships through our hundreds of members across the country through different topic areas around this work. Around support for policy, it's probably one of the main reasons why we were created in the first place. There were individuals across the country trying to talk to the federal government about a different kind of support for this kind of work. Different kinds of funding models, different kinds of restrictive criteria, so it wasn't siloed into singular projects, but it allowed for work that had kind of a multi-pronged approach to community renewal. If you want to renew a community, my goodness, are you just going to do a community garden? Are you just going to do a training program? Are you just going to build a house? No. If you're going to try and turn around conditions in communities, you need comprehensive approaches. But government programs don't really allow for that or don't understand that. And so that was part of the reason why CCEDNet was created, and we've been working hard to try and do that, and to varying degrees of success. We've had more success at the provincial and territorial levels in some places, and I mentioned yesterday the CED policy framework. In Manitoba, the piece I didn't mention there is that they also created a funding program called Neighborhoods Alive. And what it does is it picked 12 communities, most of them urban centers that had high rates of poverty, and they created neighborhood renewal corporations, giving them the mandate to renew those communities. They gave them 5-year core funding as long as they came up with a plan with the community and for the community, and their boards are made up of community residents. So this is really an investment in a holistic community renewal model, and it's giving long-term core supports in order to make that happen. And then they also have a funding program to support a wider range of initiatives in those communities as well. So going back about 10 years ago, one of the first things that CCEDNet members did is they said, we need to develop our policy agenda. And they did it by reaching out to people in the community. And there were 5 forums held across the country where they brought community actors just like this together saying, if we were to design a national policy agenda, what would be the key components? What do you need in order to do your work better? A policy agenda was created, and every couple of years we go through a whole process of renewal where we engage members across the country and say, is this still relevant? Has it changed? And it has changed over time, and it has morphed. And it's culminated in this last year where several of the national partners, the Canadian Co-op Association, the Social Enterprise Council of Canada, CCEDNet, the Chantier de l'Économie Sociale, and a number of other partners planned a national summit in Ottawa to talk policy. And it was called the Summit on the People-Centered Economy. And the idea was to once again bring actors together to decide on what the policy priorities were and to build those relationships and partnerships in order to advance them. So we had over 300 people participate. We had a declaration come out of it with the priorities. We had participation and representation from all 4 major federal political parties. And we're working now on the next steps pieces for that. Often the research and the policy work overlap or they feed into each other. So one of the pieces is with this Manitoba model, when we meet with MPs, when we meet with different committees who are studying poverty or finance or whatever, and we recommend this model, or if they're studying the grants and contributions model, and we're saying you should look at the Manitoba model, it's something to learn from, they'll ask us, so what would that look like at the federal government level? So we're doing a research piece right now, part and funded by the Social Economy Node in the Prairies, on studying the Manitoba model and trying to see what it would look like at the federal government level if we'd have a national program like this. So I think, again, that comes out of the question, both from the political level, but also a need identified by community actors across the country. We can use the research to build the framework, to build the recommendations, and then we can use our network to try and advance this. Some of the other pieces Rochelle mentioned yesterday, which I think are also interesting, we get questions all the time about what are the policy tools and models out there that seem to work, whether it's a CED tax credit in Nova Scotia, whether it's multi-stakeholder co-op legislation in different places, whether it's the CED policy framework that we have, and there's different pieces around the country, right? So one of the things that they did at the hub was to write 10 short profiles on some of the effective models, some of the innovative models. So that's in addition to the 3 bigger policy papers, where one of them was a scan of practice around the world, what seems to be happening in the social economy around the world, a second paper on what are the key policy instruments being developed around the world and what can we learn from that, and the third piece being what are the key policy instruments that we need here in Canada. So those are the ways that CCEDNet's been involved and continues to be involved, will be involved in policy and in research. It is a member-based organization, so I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't invite all of you to join and participate in it. Our committees and our boards are all made up of members from around the country. So it is another way to get involved in a national voice, and especially to bring the northern perspective and to bring the northern priorities to the national conversation. Thanks.